So my name is Mindy Hannock, and I am the Community and School Garden Coordinator for Sarasota County Extension Office. So a lot of the folks that I pair with are growing primarily vegetables, herbs, edible flowers, that type of stuff, a little bit of fruit trees, but not as much of that. And then I am accompanied by Dr. Rod Greeter, who is our Sustainable Agriculture Agent. Hi, Dr. Rod. And you're going to hear from him in a few more slides. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the resources because we can't cover everything in half an hour. And so if you hear about something that's a little interesting to you that you want to learn a little bit more, that way you can leave with some resources to explore that. And some of that's going to be shared in a follow-up email and a blog as well, because not all of the links are posted in the PowerPoint. And then also we're going to talk about some things you can grow, some things to avoid growing, and then some of the other tips and tasks and things you can do during the summer months, both in and outside. Go ahead, 3 slides, I think, because we talked about this as well. And we talked about that. All right, so one of the things that I've encountered a lot is people buy these beautiful tomato plants that are at stores. A lot of times April through June, you see these big, beautiful plants. They look great. People are really excited to grow like a beefsteak tomato plant, and the timing is not right. So please put the big, beautiful plant down, save yourself. Sometimes they're like $20 even. Save yourself some money. Instead, either buy some fresh tomatoes from the store so you can enjoy those. A lot of those are, made in Florida and they're actually coming up on harvest. If it's an heirloom tomato, you can save seeds from it. We'll get into that a little bit later. But you can instead save the money, spend it on veg and herbs of things that you can plant right now, or buy seeds for those beefsteak tomatoes that you can put out later. And we'll talk about that. And this isn't all about tomatoes. I have a 2-hour-long webinar I can point you towards if you want to dive deep into tomato growing. Next slide. So yeah, those types of plants are typically going to go out August through October. So August, September is ideal because it's nice and warm and you get a lot of growth. And then as the plant gets bigger and you start to get those blossoms that are ready to be pollinated, the nighttime temperature drops enough that you can get some nice pollination. And that's the main issue here. It's not that the plants don't necessarily grow. It's just the pollination when it's hot and humid at night is really lackluster. Disease pressure is high. So if you really, really, really must have a tomato right now, I know Rod had just put in a tomatillo not too long ago. Some folks will do Everglades tomatoes, which is kind of like a currant tomato, that type of thing. So next slide. So how do you know when it is the right time to plant a vegetable? Here in Florida, is it you're on a vegetable garden, like whether you're watching a YouTube video, you're seeing a sale at the store. It's very, very tempting. I still struggle with this, that you just, it's a deal you don't want to pass up. So I would suggest just tempering, using your resources so that if you are so inclined and you want to spend money on growing food, that you're either purchasing some of the materials that you can use later, or that you're purchasing materials that are appropriate for here right now. And we'll get into a little bit, but when talking about garden planning, I haven't found a garden planner where you can do the full layout and the suggested plants that's necessarily completely accurate for our area. If you have found one and you think it's super awesome and you want to put it in the chat, you're more than welcome. So we can share IFAS resources. When I say IFAS, I mean Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, which is us here at Extension. This is one of them. So what can you plant in June? When you look, there's an infographic for this for every month in Florida. And so June, you'll notice central, south, which one are you? We're on the cusp. So your yard, it may swing a little bit one direction or the other. When they put this out, they basically said South of State Road 70 is south. So they consider us south. It's early June, and if you love something that's in the central zone and you want to kind of give it a go, and maybe it's not in boiling sun, I'd probably still try it. But I do want to mention, so if you're not familiar with some of these vegetables, definitely go ahead and give them a try before you plant them. And one of the ways you can do that is, and I will mispronounce this, and my apologies. Chayote is it's in the gourd family, and you can eat it raw, you can eat it cooked. You can, per Instacart or any web search, you can find some of the grocery stores that carry that produce right now, and buy a few, taste a couple. If you really like it, you can actually plant the fruit, is how you plant it. So that's something that you can find in some of the stores. I think Sprouts, Save a Lot, a few other ones have had it recently. So that's something to explore. You get a chance to taste it and actually literally plant the fruit of it to grow it. It's a big vine. You're going to want to trellis and support it. So when you're looking at your landscape, consider where you might put that. You can do amaranth. Amaranth grows really well here. Just know if you plant amaranth and you let it go to seed, you will have amaranth into perpetuity. Pigeon peas, something. And then I would add like pineapple and things like that, papaya. I don't put those in my veggie beds because they're rather long lasting. Those are things you can put out in your landscape. Same thing for chayote if you have a nice fence that you want to trellis it to. And tropical spinaches are very productive. And we'll get into that in just a minute. Go ahead, next page. I have to talk faster. So the tropical spinaches, they're under names like longevity spinach, Malabar spinach, New Zealand, Okinawan, Suriname. And none of them are going to taste exactly like a spinach, but they will tolerate our heat and they will produce foliage that you can eat. You can plant sweet potato and eat that foliage as well. Some of these plants take a while to produce. So if they may take 3 to 4 or so months to actually produce, like your sweet potatoes, the boniatos and like calabaza, they may be taking up how much space in your veggie bed. And if it's not in production, like if it hasn't gotten ready to harvest yet, you may actually be postponing when you put out your next crops. So, so just be aware of that, because now we're going to look at, you saw what was available to plant in June. Just know that list isn't completely all inclusive. There are some other things that you can try to grow in Florida. Some of them, let's see here. Yeah, just mentioned about pineapple, pigeon pea, rosemary, those types of things you don't have to put specifically in your veggie beds. We talked about chayote. Spinach, you can buy seeds online frequently. Go ahead. We're talking about the considerations of what you plant now can put off what you can put out in late summer, early fall when your options are wider. So go ahead. And we're going to show you what that looks like. So here's the infographic of some of the things that you can plant in July. You'll notice it's very similar to what it said for June. And I understand you might be looking at a screen of a certain size. So these are some of the things that we're going to share to you as follow-up resources. And then go ahead. See how August opens up a little bit more under the south side when it's talking about like your eggplant and your peppers, and okra gets added back in, and some of your tomatoes and things like that. So because those are some of your warm season crops. So just be aware what you're putting in. If you're putting it in your sole growing area and it's something that, you know, like a sweet potato that takes a long time to produce, just have an idea in your mind of when you want to plan out your crops for fall, and just kind of work backwards that way. So you prioritize what you're going to eat and use the most. And go ahead. And you'll see now as we move into September, a lot of options are added. So that's the main reason I mentioned it's great if you want to grow produce in summer. A lot of what people are harvesting in summer is sometimes planted in like in that spring window of time. So you can still grow some things, but it'll start to impact what you put out in fall. And I would say if with the chayote, if you go and buy that at the store, there's lots of fun recipes on YouTube. Explore that, because there are so many ways you can prepare it. It's rather benign in flavor, which is kind of nice. It makes it versatile, and it can live a few years. So, you know, again, that's something to add somewhere in your landscape where you can leave the plant. You can also grow some herbs. You can do ginger that does really well in less light. So if you have an area of your yard that is not getting adequate light and you want to grow food, that's something to put there. You can do cumin, some are savory, basil, Mexican tarragon, rosemary. Rosemary will last for years, so I don't necessarily give it a spot in an edible bed. that can go in your landscape. You can do marigolds, that type of thing. And a lot of people enjoy planting fruit trees this time of year because they're trying to get it close to rainy season. As we've seen, we haven't gotten a lot of rain, so just know that you're going to need to water to establish. So that may mean you're watering every day for a few weeks, then to every other day, and use a rain gauge. So when it does rain, you have an idea how much rain you actually got. Don't plant your fruit trees too deep, and make sure that whatever you plant for a fruit tree is going to actually fruit in our area. So they make low chill peaches and various other things. You don't want to buy like a rabbit eye blueberry, which is appropriate for like North Florida, and put it in your yard here and wonder why it's not producing as much. Go ahead, Brad. All right. So you can be incredibly productive with your garden in Florida. Allow that it's probably going to include higher effort than up north, simply because we do have longer growing seasons, but a lot of our transitions are in our hotter months. And we do have more disease and pest pressure. So allow for that. Also, we have sandy soil, so a lot of times you're needing to do some form of amendment to build up your organic matter so that your plants get adequate nutrition. And we regularly rely on irrigation because our rains are sporadic, and they usually aren't falling during the peak months of when people are growing, from like September through April. We had some nice rain over the winter time, but it wasn't normal. I would suggest exploring different methods, because maybe you look into self-watering containers, maybe you look into deep tissue water culture, maybe you're growing in the ground, maybe you're growing in a raised bed, maybe you're doing edible landscaping. There's lots of different ways that you can grow here, and you just kind of want to match it for what suits your space and your interest and energy level. And then allow any of the projects that we talk about that you're going to be doing it in smaller spurts. So unless you're really used to doing a lot of work outside, and as the temperatures heat up, you want to allow that projects may not be like done in a day unless you have a lot of people involved. You're going to want to ration those projects out, so that way you do less and more often, so that way you're not overheating. Go ahead, Brad.
Okay, thank you, Mindy. And I see there's some comments and questions coming up in the chat. Please continue to put your comments in there and questions, and we will circle back after we cover off the content here to answer those questions. So we'll keep it moving smoothly here. So as Mindy has talked about, what can you grow now? We'd also like to talk about what else can you do with that plot that you might normally have vegetables growing from September through May, but you want to take the summer off for the very reasons that Mindy just mentioned. It's too hot. And someone who has already been flirting with heat exhaustion this early summer, it's only going to get worse, right? We all know that for the next 3, 4, 5 months. So I generally like to take the summer off and do other things and not try to beat the heat. So one of the things that you can do on your plot is to cover it. So what else can you be doing to that plot to make your gardening success in our winter season, September through May, more successful? One of those things is covering. So this can accomplish a lot of different things for us. So you can cover to suppress weeds. As Mindy said, if you're doing amaranth or you have red root pigweed as a weed, each one of those plants that has adequate moisture and sunlight can have hundreds of thousands of seeds on that plant. So if you don't take care of it, you're going to have those seeds in your seed bank for the next decade or more. So cover it to help prevent the weeds. We'll talk a little bit more about what some options are there. You also might want to do some solarization. We'll talk about what that means. Cover cropping, that's a rage that a lot of people are talking about now, is how do I get continuous ground cover to accomplish various things. We'll talk about a lot of the pros associated with that, and also some things to think about. And then we'll talk about sheet composting. Many of us are familiar with more traditional backyard composting or vermicomposting using worms, but there are some kind of DIY ways to go about composting too. And it also serves in covering your garden. And we can talk about, if you want to have some crops out there, which ones can be kind of double purpose. So they can maybe produce something edible through the summer, but also can help suppress weeds, add nitrogen, and various other things. So generally covering for weed prevention, you want to stop the weeds, of course, right? So we can cover it, and you can cover it with cardboard, with newspaper, with tarp. There's lots of different things you can use, a weed fabric, but you want to make sure that it is going to stop the weeds from coming through. So if you're going to use a mulch or something, make sure that it is thick enough, concentrated enough to stop the weeds from busting through it. If we're going to use other sheeting, well, then it's got to be thick enough too that it doesn't break down, it doesn't get poked, and it doesn't just degrade in the field. And thick layers of cardboard are also another way. Mindy and I did some demonstrations at Culver House Community Garden here in Sarasota County probably a year ago on doing what we call lasagna gardening, or using coverings such as cardboard over the summer. And it works. It does. It might look a little unorthodox. Your neighbors might say, well, what do you got all that cardboard out there for? But it's serving a purpose, and it's a inexpensive way to do weed cover. Now, if you're going to use cardboard or even light plastic or newspaper, you're going to need to weight it down, bury the edges, pin it down. Throw some grass on top of it. You're going to want to make it stay in place. And before you do it, though, you're going to want to thoroughly wet down that spot, because you want it nice and moist. Because what you want is a lot of that weed seed in your seed bank in your soil to emerge or germinate and then die off. And if you're going to use a waterproof plastic, make sure that it's sloped in a way that the water runs off of it and you're not creating ponds and areas for mosquitoes. We've got enough of those already. Another way to do that is to do what we call solarizing, and this is to use clear plastic. And what this does is allows the sunlight, and of course you want to moist it down again, water it down before you do it, so that you can get germination as much as possible. And then that sunlight goes through that plastic, acts like a greenhouse, and heats up that top to 4 to 12 inches of soil and cooks it. Now, this will help control nematodes, depends on how hot you get it. It can also control other pathogens, and it can cook weed seed. But if you're trying to build a soil health and build up concentrations and populations of beneficial soil microorganisms, this can set them back too. They also don't like intense heat. Most of our soil microorganisms like it that range about the same as humans, 80 to 90. You get much above that, and then they start dying off. So be careful that solarizing can solarize your soil and kill it too. And it may take a while to build back up those soil microorganisms. And you got to deal with the plastic, right? A lot of this plastic isn't heavy duty, and it might rip and tear. And what are you going to do with that plastic at the end of the season? So you got to kind of plan through why you're using it and how you're going to use it, and do it in an environmentally conscious way. So I mentioned sheet composting, or also called lasagna gardening. And this is where you can use newspaper, several layers of newspaper, some cardboard, and you put layers of greens and browns on it so that they can break down. Any of you that do composting know you have to have the right carbon to nitrogen ratio there to get good decomposition. So covering it in this way, again, in a very affordable way, helps control those weeds, and helps you retain moisture as well. Now, cover cropping refers more to growing living plants on your plot to control erosion. It could help with weed suppression. It could help by having those green living roots in that soil profile, also help improve soil fertility and improve organic matter. But things like improving soil fertility and organic matter using cover crops are a long-term process. You're not going to do that one summer and suddenly have doubled your organic matter and improved your soil fertility. It's going to take repeated cycles of that to get benefits from that. And when it comes to cover crops and weed suppression, cover crops can suppress weeds, but if you don't get a good stand, if it's not thick enough, you're going to get the weeds coming up through the middle of it, and you won't have accomplished your purpose. Also with cover crops, depending on what you use, you might also be able to get some nitrogen fixation cooking by using legumes like cowpea or sun hemp. And there too, you're only going to get the benefit of nitrogen fixation and concentration of soil nitrogen that are available for your plants the next season if you have a solid concentration and good inoculation and a lot of nodules on those plants. Just because you have cowpea there, if you don't have the right soil inoculum and the nodules don't cook out nitrogen, it's not going to improve your soil N. So a lot of these things depend on how it's done before you get the benefit for it. Sun hemp is one that we are using quite a bit here in Sarasota, and it can do the weed suppression. It's also a nitrogen fixer, and it's not a host for root knot nematode, which we have identified as an issue here. So if you have that as a problem, root knot sun hemp can help break that life cycle of sun hemp, but it's not going to happen again in one season. And if you have other weeds come up that are an alternate host for root knot, then you've not accomplished that purpose either. So how you do these things, I know I'm repeating myself, and that's intentional. How you do these things also matters as much as what you're trying to do.
Can I chime in too, Rod, of this
Absolutely.
one? I'm a sucker for yellow flowers, and the sun hemp has beautiful yellow flowers on it. So
It
just
does.
don't let
It
it
gets
get too
people's
big or you
attention.
need a tractor to move it.
Yes. Yeah, and that's another good point there, is if you're going to use things like sun hemp, it tends to be very woody when it matures. So you're going to end up having to bury a broomstick and have to deal with that. And how are you going to work around it if you want to cut it and drop it, or chop it and drop it? How are you going to work around that with your planting and your tillage and other things? So there's good practices in using things like sun hemp before you get the full benefit of it. But they are useful to cover crops, and the things like lasagna gardening are helpful for building organic matter. And as Mindy said, we have a problem with our fine sands in Florida. Our organic matter generally is less than 1%. I'm sure many of you are from up north. Where I come from in the Midwest in Iowa and Minnesota, our organic matter is from 3 to 5%. Down here, we're lucky if we have a 0.5%. So anything we can do to build organic matter is well worth it. And by adding compost and those types of things, it can be expensive. If you're talking about a 4x8 raised bed, go for it. You're talking about half an acre, now it starts to add up. And you want to build that organic matter in the best way that you can. Nematodes, let's just call them a little microscopic worm. They can cause a lot of damage. You may not see them killing your plant, but you'll see that your plants aren't productive. And you'll want to dig them up, use a little handheld microscope and figure it out. Or if you want to pull a sample, we can send it into the nematology lab at UF in Gainesville, and they can tell us whether you have nematodes and what they are. It costs about $37, I think, now for a sample. But if you're talking about a half an acre again, that might be worth it. A raised bed box, maybe don't worry about it. Just try the sun hemp or something like that to break the life cycle. Mindy, you want to take this one?
Sure. All right. So if you enjoy being outside or doing that intermittently, this is a really great time to assess your space, and especially when it comes to runoff, because as we do get rain, you can look at where is the water moving on your property, and also how does your property drain. And so this helps you decide if you're growing food and you want to consider food safety, which ideally you do. It kind of gives you an idea if you're getting runoff from somebody's dog kennel, is that going to run off into where you're growing your veg? That type of thing, or is the rain coming off the roof going to be pounding onto veg? And also, are you retaining moisture in certain areas more than others? Because there are some fruit trees that can tolerate that better than others. Same thing for your veg. So this time of year, as we do get rain, it is going to be a really good time to go out and assess your drainage. You can look at your space, evaluate your lighting, measure your space. You can try to anticipate seasonal differences. We have a longer day during the summer months, and the sun is more directly overhead. Whereas in like fall through spring, it starts to get more into the southern side. So you would want to avoid anything big, like a big grand oak on the south side of where you want to grow veg, because that's what I encounter in my yard. It makes it fun. And so you can kind of evaluate the different spots in your landscape, because a lot of things are right plant, right place, and then also with food, right time. So what are those places that you have available? What are the things that you want to grow, and where do you think those things will match up? You can install your beds, your fencing, your trellis. You can do various different things, tasks like that. Especially if you live in a community where maybe there's more people here during the winter months, and they don't want to have construction or disturbance right next to them. Sometimes summer is a great time to get some of those projects done. Also service or repair your equipment, your tools, your beds, that type of thing. Give everything a run through. And then if you were growing something and you didn't write down what you grew, I'm always operating with the idea I'm going to remember. I will not remember. So if you haven't pulled up all your plants yet and you do remember what you had out, it's a great time to kind of just make a little rough template and note down what you had and where you had it, if you are wanting to practice any rotation of your crops. If you have old brassicas you haven't pulled out yet and they have seed pods on them, like you can harvest some seeds. You can, your arugulas, your mustards, some of your other brassicas, you can cut them up and bury them down as they break down. It kind of works to, nematodes don't like it, so they start to evacuate that area, which is great. You can do the same for marigolds. And then also, if you start to see a lot of weeds in your mulched paths, you can rake off the mulch that's still good, dig out the soil, like basically the mulch is broken down to a growing medium and you have weeds growing in it. So you can actually dig out that decent soil, put it in your raised beds, so you don't have to purchase as much soil, and then just reapply a thicker layer of mulch. And that also helps give you a little bit of time, so you're not constantly having to go out and weed as often over the summer. And then if you have anywhere where water can pool, some of the like the polyethylene sheeting or the tarp, sometimes they're not, sometimes they work because they're not porous, but if you have a shady spot or areas where water can pool, you just want to make sure it's not an area where you can have mosquitoes breeding. And then if you can't you can buy mosquito dunks, things like that, that would address that as well, if you can't alter the area and tip your pots over and stuff.
Just another follow-up comment too on the arugula and marigolds and controlling nematodes. Again, it's got to be complete, otherwise you're going to get partial control and you're going to be disappointed. So we hear these things of, oh, use marigolds, but you have to do them in the right, use them in the right way over time to get the benefits. They're not a silver bullet.
Yeah, and none of these would be for eradication. It's just for some control to mitigate. So hopefully you'll have some improved production in fall. And the other thing too is, if you are going to be composting or sheet composting or anything, and you have nematodes, you get a lot of nodules on your roots, that type of thing, just don't compost that roots and add to the problem. Remove those and dispose of them. You can make your planting plan for the upcoming year. That's a fun thing to do in air conditioning, and next to a resource like the internet and books. So what do you want to grow? When do you want to grow it? Make a plan. You can do a lot of succession planting in Florida. So make those ideas of like, hey, if I think this plant will be able to be harvested at this time, that's going to open up that space. What would you put in that space after that? Because there are so many options, I tend to get stuck. And by the time I get unstuck, I realize I could have planted and grown something and eaten it already. So my suggestion for that, and what I'm going to do this year, is as I have any spots open up, if it's the right time for baby lettuce or baby brassica, some of those things you can start eating within 3 weeks from when you sow it. Same thing for radishes. I'm going to plant those out as a filler. And that way I have something growing. So by the time I've made up my mind, I still have more food, and I put something in that's going to, make good use of the space that I have. and those seeds are very affordable. And then where are you going to buy your seeds and your starts? It's a great time to do research as far as, what businesses you want to support. There's a lot of seed companies out there, and a lot of them give really great information. But when it comes to crop descriptions, just remember they are selling you something. So focus on the words that you think are relevant to you. So some folks buy only from seed companies that they consider Southern. I'm pretty broad in where I'll purchase seed from, but I will look at words like slow to bolt, heat tolerant, disease resistant, those types of things. To make sure that it's something that I think is suitable for here. And then I can also cross-reference with IFAS. So that way I don't buy rhubarb because it's not worth the torture here. So definitely make use of some of their, and also some of those seed companies give really great tools that you can use. Look in the different side menus, and also at the bottom of the web pages, things get buried there. And they have comparison charts. So when you're trying to decide between your crops, I tend to go for a shorter day to harvest because I'm greedy. And I figure the less time in the ground, the less chance for disease to interrupt my ability to eat it. Take advantage of sales. There has been a lot of nationwide, type of sales in relation to gardening. So I bought some elevated beds online at like half price, I think over the Memorial Day weekend. Botanical Interest had a really good seed sale. Some of the other seed companies will have seeds on sale as well. So take advantage of those things while you can. Some of the box stores have done sales on mulch and soil, garden beds. And then Rod, you were able to take advantage of some of the plants that were on sale. I think, did you mention you got tomatillo and a few other things?
Yes, we did. We got the tomatillos planted a week ago, and they're going gangbusters. They like it a little warm.
Yep. So you can take advantage of those things. You just want to cross-reference back so that way you're not, sometimes some of the stores may have cold season crops that things were ordered en masse and aren't necessarily for here. Also watch out for online ads, because I don't know if this happens to you, but I know it happened to me and at least one other person I know probably a year or so ago. It gave me a lead on a material like a trellis and an elevated bed, and the price was beautiful, but it was a company I didn't know, and it popped up as an advertisement, I forget, in Facebook or Google of something, and because it must have known what I was searching for. And so I got suckered. I bought something that never arrived to my door. And I know at least one other person that happened to. So just remember, sometimes it's great because you get stuff fed to you that you want to, that it's helping you skip a step. But if it's not a company that you're aware of, just do some due diligence before you give them any money. That way I save you money and spend my own. You can buy veg seeds, or you can also vegetables with seeds that you want to save from. This is more applicable if you get into like heirloom type things, in that it's going to be open pollinated, so it might taste reminiscent to what you actually eat. So you might find some heirloom tomatoes in the store, things like that. You can practice seed saving from that. You can save seeds from other veg that you eat. It just may not taste exactly like what you ate. So I know there's a gardener that she saves seeds from just about everything she eats, and she has a very productive garden plot, and it's not the way I would have normally gone about it, but she really makes it work. So so that's another thing that you can consider doing. Them seeds have to be mature, that type of thing.
Another comment I would make here, and this is something that Mindy and I go back and forth on, is the need of whether the seed needs to be organic and whether it's better to be heirloom. That's a personal preference, but keep in mind that heirloom seed, they stopped improving it and breeding it many years ago, if it was ever selectively improved. So it may not have the best disease resistance, drought tolerance, insect resistance. Don't put all your eggs in one basket and plant 15 heirloom tomatoes and then be disappointed because they all get blossom end rot, and that's not really a disease. It's more of a watering and calcium thing, but that it'll all be susceptible to one thing. Also on organic, you're going to take away all of your tools if you think that you have to grow it organically. It's a personal preference if you want to do that, but also be wary that you're leaving those plants open to disease, weeds, insects, and other things. So just be conscious of that decreased margin for error in your garden.
Yeah, and a lot of times, and there's clarity of like a hybrid doesn't mean GMO or anything like that if people are concerned about that type of stuff. Hybrid just means like it's not going to be open pollinated, where if you're saving seeds from it, it may not taste exactly like what you ate. I namely like to do it because I don't want to, I enjoy buying seeds. But I also want to be economical. So sometimes I'm going to mix it up with things I can save seed from and resow. And then other times I'm going to buy seeds, especially if I'm looking for something disease resistant, like people sometimes struggle with basil here. And you can buy downy mildew resistant basil online really easily. So, and it does really well. And then Rod, or I can field this, and then if you want to talk about the soil, we did talk about the importance of irrigation. For production, it's good to have a reliable source of irrigation, whether that's you holding a hose and having a backup friend if you're traveling, well, and which is a lot of times what we have to do with the community gardens. But if you're at home and you have the ability to put in an irrigation system, there's some very minor ones that you can install yourself. And so that's something to consider. And these are free right now, these resources, learning about irrigation and setting up drip systems. So, so we'll be sending those links to you as well, if that's something that you'd like to explore.
Just a comment on soil real quick. If you're new to gardening in Florida, or you're starting gardening in a new area in your yard or somewhere else, you don't know what that soil is like. So spend the $5, $10 to do a soil test. We can determine your pH and salinity here at our Sarasota County Extension office, but I strongly recommend you spend the $10 or $15, send it to University of Florida Soil Lab in Gainesville, and they'll tell you what the pH is, whether the salinity, also P and K, and the micronutrients. You can also have the organic matter determined, and also the cation exchange capacity, which identifies how well that soil can retain the nutrients. And we are concerned about that, of course, in our sandy soils, because if the soil doesn't latch on to those nutrients, where do they end up? In our groundwater, and then in our estuaries and everywhere else, and we red tide, and we all know the story there. But this during the summer is also a good time to figure out what you need to have to amend your soil to make it the most productive.
And I'll send in the follow-up, there's going to be a lot of links and resources. One of them is the organic vegetable gardening guide. And the main reason I'm including that one is it clarifies definitions of things. So it helps you when you're shopping, but it also has many useful charts at the end, and it talks about the different nutrient values and pH of some of the different soil amendments. So then that way, if you are making your own blend, or you discover that you're short in something, it kind of gives you an idea of what you might want to use. So we'll include that. And some of it actually, you can just go through the list and says whether or not it's excellent or suggested for different things. So, so you'll get that in follow up. And then additional things you can do. I don't know if you have any like kids visiting in your life. This is a really great time to put them to work. So if they are visiting you and you have some time indoors, you can do things like making seed tape. So a lot of times like lettuce seeds and baby brassica seeds, where you sow them, or carrot seeds, a lot of those things, the seeds are very small and they roll around, and you're out trying to plant them directly in your garden. And sometimes when you're doing that, it's still rather warm out. And I like having kids do this because it helps them with fine motor and counting, and they have something fun to do. And then later on, you're not scrambling, chasing after little seeds rolling everywhere. So, and sometimes it's toilet paper and glue. It doesn't have to be anything super fancy. And then other people, if they're doing a square foot template, they might be putting it mapped out on that as far as how many seeds they want sown in that square foot. So that's a fun thing to do with kids, or you could do that as a date night if you like. I find the super small seeds more challenging. So if I can have a kid help me, that's great. You can also look for takeout containers at home, things that you could use for seed starting. You can make paper pots, stuff like that. You can explore, like say you really want to grow something, but you don't want to be outside, you can explore growing sprouts and microgreens. You can pretty soon, it won't be too long from now, you have time to order seeds if you want to, and learn how to do seed starts inside for what you want to put out later. So you still have some time to do that. And I'll share resources on it. And then also explore the plants in your landscape. What might you want to propagate from? Do you have a banana and you have how many in the cluster, and you want to separate some out and gift a banana to someone or spread more out on your landscape? There's various different things. Maybe you have lemongrass or gingers, etc. Maybe you have things that you can practice propagating from, and also for cuttings and stuff like that. So lots of things you can kind of do to explore growing more food and more plants in general. And go ahead. You talked about soil test.
Yep.
I think that went backwards.
Oops.
All right. You can also, if you have a cool space where you don't mind sharing space with worms, a really great way to start, like you can get rid of food scraps while simultaneously getting the worms to make worm castings that you can later use in your garden. That's something that you can explore doing. You just don't want to do it outside in full sun because the earthworms will bake. Some folks have a shady, cool spot on their patio. Other folks have a cool spot in their garage. Some people will keep them indoors, but you can make bins, and we have classes on that. I would pick a few crops that you really, really want to grow and explore those more deeply, because it kind of gives you a leg up to know if there's something particular that they prefer more than others. And if you're ever wanting to know how to grow something, if you type IFAS and the search word, so if you type tomato IFAS or cucumber IFAS, you're going to get UF information there. And sometimes it can be very technical if they've done a lot of research on it, and it might be more geared towards a grower. But if you put video or blog with that, sometimes you'll get videos about it or a really relatable blog with additional resources linked. Ralph Mitchell, the agent out of Charlotte County, his blogs are really cool. And a lot of times he'll talk about some edible crops. Tia Silvasi out of Hillsborough County does the same. And there's a whole series about Florida-friendly edible landscaping with lots of really great information. And then for books from the library, I love going to the libraries, especially in the summer. And Stevens, McCubbin, Bowden, and Steibel, they all have books that you should be able to find. And then I love looking at seed catalogs too. I have to rein myself in. And this is also a wonderful time. Sometimes during the cool months during season when our population is higher, we have a lot of questions, and we might be at a nursery or a box store, and we might not get as much time with the person to ask us all the questions that we have. Sometimes during down season, it's a really great time to go back to those same places, and you may encounter folks that have a little more time to talk to you and have conversation about some of the products that they sell, some of the plants that they sell. And so I would take advantage of that and help that inform your experience of what you want to grow and the businesses you want to support for that. I would still double check the zones because sometimes we stretch it. And then go ahead, Rod.
The seasons, as those of you that have been gardening in Florida for a while know, that we have very distinct seasons, right? What do they call them, Mindy? A hot, hotter, hottest, and still hot, or something like that.
I think that's the Minnesotan in
yes,
talking. Yes,
that's my interpretation. But obviously, there are things that fit better to the rainfall patterns, the day length, and the heat profile. So in the warm season, beans, tomato, things that like a little bit of heat are going to do well. The cooler season, maybe November, December, January, beets and brassicas. And then it starts to warm up again, and you can start to do the beans and tomatoes. During the summer, southern peas, okra, sweet potatoes. We have a plot for our beginning farmer program that we have started here in Sarasota. We are doing some sweet potatoes, some okra, Seminole pumpkins. We're trying some watermelons. We're having a little bit of problem with some anthracnose. We planted some tomatillos. We've also got some Asian vegetables, some tropical beans. We're trying some different things to see what's going to work the best during the summer here. But we're also doing cover crops and covering and doing lots of different things. So the seasons really matter. Here's a great publication from IFAS, as Mindy has been trying to turn you on to our publications because they're research-based and unbiased. We're not trying to sell you seeds or microbials or mulch or anything like that. And this is a very detailed guide on what to plant when by north, central, and southern parts of the state. And it tells you, when to plant it and how to plant it. So we have the link here and you can go and download that yourself. I have a hard copy. Mindy has a hard copy. We give away a lot of these. This is probably our go-to reference for growing edible vegetables in the state of Florida.
All right, and then that was essentially it.
Okay.
If you're unsure of what you want to plant, I'd go back to the and you really do want to grow food, I'd go back to the June reference and also some of the herbs, and then look at some of the recipes, because sometimes when I'm waffling, I look to see what I can make with certain crops, and that kind of helps me decide how excited I am about it and whether or not I want to go to the effort to do it. And there's some things I'm gonna try some like red leaf amaranth, and I have some tropical spinaches and a few other things I'm gonna put out, but I'm not gonna go too crazy because I'm really looking forward to August and September. So.
And I just stuck the link to the Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide back into the chat. Somebody had requested that.
Yeah, and that one does not get too much into some of the summer ones, but looking at if you Google IFAS summer or heat tolerant, those types of things, that tends to pop up some more. But that guide is our go-to, and then I'll include other things where you can just plug in your zip code and it'll tell you what to plant. For summer, it put just sweet potato. It wasn't as elaborate as even the infographic. But it is also a time where you might start being able to find some of the summer crops. If you are wanting to save seeds from like Seminole pumpkin and calabaza and that type of stuff, you might be more likely to start seeing some of those crops at food stands or at local groceries if you're looking to save seeds from some of those crops. So, all right. I'm not seeing any additional questions. So if there's something somebody asked that we didn't answer or put the link to, please chime in. And otherwise, we will say good night or goodbye, good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciated it.